The Tale of Anubis and the Weighing of the Heart. I was 17 when I first encountered death, not as an abstract concept, but as a presence standing before me in the quiet halls of Cairo's museum. A jackal-headed figure carved in obsidian, eyes glinting with ancient wisdom, held golden scales that seemed to measure the weight of my gaze. That night I dreamed of Anubis, guardian of souls, weighing my still-beating heart against a single ostrich feather. The feather trembled, my heart pulsed, and his eyes, those patient, eternal eyes, watched without judgment. The dream recurred for weeks after I returned home, pulling me back to Egypt in my sleep, whispering secrets about truth and eternity. What I learned in the days that followed about judgment, balance, and the thin veil between our world and what lies beyond has never left me. Even now, decades later, I feel the gentle pressure of those scales whenever I face a moment of truth. The morning after my first encounter with Anubis, I returned to the museum. The crowds of tourists flowed around me like water around a stone as I stood transfixed before the jackal-headed figure. The obsidian caught the light differently each time someone passed, making those ancient eyes seem to flicker with life. "You feel it too, don't you?" a voice said beside me, soft and weathered like papyrus. I turned to find an elderly man in a neatly pressed linen suit, his dark eyes bright beneath silver brows. His name tag read Dr. Mahmoud Hassan, Senior Curator. "Feel what?" I asked, though something in me already knew. "The weight," he said, gesturing to the scales in Anubis's hands. "Most visitors see only a strange animal-headed god." "But you see the scales," he wasn't asking a question. I nodded, embarrassed by the intensity of my fascination. "I've studied the weighing of the heart ceremony for 50 years, he said, his English crisp but warm with the rhythms of his native Arabic. "And still I learn something new each time I stand here." Dr. Hassan invited me to his office that afternoon. I expected the sterile confines of an academic workspace, but instead found myself in a room that felt more like a library from another century. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, interspersed with artifacts I suspected weren't meant to leave the museum. The air smelled of cardamom and old paper. He poured us tea from a battered silver pot. "The ancient Egyptians," he began, passing me a small glass cup, "believed the heart was the center of all thought, emotion, and character. Not the brain, the heart." The tea was sweeter than I expected, flavored with mint. When death came, Anubis would lead the deceased to judgment. The heart would be placed on one side of the scales. On the other, he made a delicate gesture with his fingers. "A feather." "Just a feather?" I asked. "Not just any feather. The feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic order." His fingers traced the rim of his teacup. "If your heart was heavy with sin, the scales would tip and your soul would be devoured by Amit. And if it balanced with the feather, then you would join Osiris in the field of reeds. Paradise." His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. But the weighing itself, that was Anubis's domain, the careful measurer, the impartial judge. As the afternoon light shifted through the windows, Dr. Hassan spoke of ancient papyri and tomb paintings. He showed me images of the ceremony. Anubis bent over the scales, the ibis-headed Thoth recording the verdict, the fearsome Amit waiting nearby with crocodile jaws ready. "There are those who still honor the old ways," he said abruptly, studying me with a gaze that seemed to measure something within me. "Would you like to see beyond these museum walls? To understand the weighing as more than academic curiosity?" The question hung in the air between us. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Cairo, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold that reminded me of the scales in Anubis's careful hands. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with my certainty. I would. 2 days later, I found myself in Dr. Hassan's aging Mercedes, driving south from Cairo toward Saqqara. The ancient necropolis had stood for nearly 5,000 years, her city of the dead where generations of Egyptians had been laid to rest under the watchful eyes of their gods. The tombs here tell us more about life than death, Dr. Hassan said as we left the Nile Valley, and the landscape transformed into endless sand. What people choose to take with them, the scenes they want to look at for eternity, these reveal what truly mattered. The heat rose from the desert in shimmering waves, blurring the horizon until sky and sand seemed to melt into one another. I rolled down the window, letting the hot, dry air fill my lungs. It tasted ancient, as though the desert itself was breathing memories into me. We arrived as the worst heat of the day began to subside. The necropolis spread before us, a sprawling complex of tombs and monuments scattered across the sand like the discarded toys of giants. The step pyramid of Djoser dominated the landscape, its massive form catching the slanting afternoon light. "Not there," Dr. Hassan said, noting my gaze. "We're looking for something more intimate." He led me along a path less traveled by tourists to a small tomb half buried in sand. A local man appeared as if summoned by our footsteps, exchanging rapid Arabic with Dr. Hassan before unlocking a rusted gate. "Ibrahim has been caretaker here for 30 years, Dr. Hassan explained. "His father before him and his grandfather before that." Ibrahim nodded to me, his weathered face creasing into a smile that revealed missing teeth. "He knows Anubis," Dr. Hassan translated. "He says the jackal god still walks these sands after dark." I couldn't tell if they were teasing me, but something in Ibrahim's eyes, a kind of reverent certainty, made my skin prickle despite the heat. Inside the tomb, the temperature dropped dramatically. Ibrahim lit old-fashioned oil lamps rather than electric lights, and the flickering illumination brought the wall paintings to eerie life. The colors, blues, reds, and golds, remained vivid after thousands of years, preserved in the dry desert air. "Here," Dr. Hassan said, holding a lamp close to one wall. "The Weighing of the Heart." The painting showed a figure, clearly deceased, being led by Anubis to a great hall. In the center stood the scales, gold against a background of deep blue. Anubis bent over them, adjusting the balance with careful fingers. On one side lay a human heart painted red, on the other a white feather. "The moment of truth," Dr. Hassan murmured, "when all pretense falls away." As he translated the hieroglyphics surrounding the scene, I studied the face of the deceased. The artist had captured an expression of absolute terror mixed with hope, the universal human response to judgment. We moved deeper into the tomb, following the painted journey of the soul. Ibrahim spoke softly to Dr. Hassan, who translated fragments. He says his grandfather saw Anubis once standing among the dunes. He says the old gods are patient, they watch and wait. Time seemed to slip away as we explored. When we finally emerged, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the necropolis. The distant pyramids glowed golden in the dying light, and somewhere, far off but clear in the desert, silence, came the yipping howl of jackals. Ibrahim crossed himself, a gesture that seemed at odds with the ancient beliefs we'd been discussing, and muttered something. "He says we should leave before dark." Dr. Hassan translated, a small smile playing at his lips. "That's when Anubis walks." As we drove back toward Cairo, the desert darkness absolute around us, I thought I glimpsed something moving among the dunes, a tall, lean silhouette with pointed ears, walking with measured grace. But it was gone before I could be certain, just a shadow against shadows, perhaps nothing more than my imagination inflamed by ancient art and Ibrahim's stories. Yet the weight of those painted scales stayed with me, more real somehow than the modern city lights we were approaching. "You have questions?" Dr. Hassan said the following evening as we sat in his study. The day had been spent in quiet reflection, my mind returning again and again to the tomb paintings and the weight of their meaning. Outside, Cairo hummed with modern life, car horns, music, the call to prayer. But within these walls, time seemed to pool rather than flow. "Yes," I admitted. How could they believe so completely in this judgment? In Anubis and his scales? Dr. Hassan rose slowly, his joints protesting with small creaks, and moved to an ancient wooden chest in the corner. From it, he withdrew a cylindrical object wrapped in linen cloth. With reverent care, he placed it on the table between us and unwrapped it. Inside lay a papyrus scroll, brown with age, fragile as autumn leaves. "This," he said softly, "is not for the museum." "Not yet," my breath caught. "Is it authentic?" "Very. Late period, perhaps 600 BCE. His fingers hovered over the delicate surface without touching it. "It was found in a priest's tomb near Abydos. My father acquired it unofficially." I leaned closer. The papyrus showed scenes similar to those in the tomb, but more detailed, more intimate. The hieroglyphics were faded but distinct. "It's an account written by a priest of Anubis," Dr. Hassan explained. "A record of the ritual preparation for death and the journey beyond." His finger traced the air above a line of hieroglyphs. He writes, "The heart speaks truth even when the mouth lies. Before Anubis all is revealed." As the night deepened around us, Dr. Hassan translated the ancient text. The priest described how the heart was the vessel of a person's true nature, not their public face or spoken words, but their actual deeds and intentions. At death, the heart remained in the body while other organs were removed, preserved separately in canopic jars. The heart alone would face judgment. "Here," Dr. Hassan said, indicating a passage, he describes how Anubis tests the heart against the feather of Ma'at. The feather represents truth, justice, harmony, all that is right in the cosmic order. The papyrus showed the scales in exquisite detail. Anubis stood tall and alert, his jackal ears pointed forward in concentration. The ibis-headed Thoth stood ready to record the verdict, while Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, waited nearby, her fearsome jaws open. If the heart was heavier than the feather, Dr. Hassan continued, it meant the deceased was burdened with sin, with violation of Ma'at. Amit would devour the heart and the soul would cease to exist. "No afterlife at all?" I asked. "Worse than that, oblivion, as if you had never been." His voice grew soft. "But if the heart balanced with the feather, you would join Osiris in the field of reeds, a paradise reflecting the best of life on earth. You would become one with the gods, surrounded by everything you had loved in life, free from pain and want." The lamp on his desk flickered, sending shadows dancing across the ancient papyrus. In that shifting light, Anubis's painted eyes seemed to watch us, measuring our reactions to the priest's words. "They feared oblivion more than punishment," I murmured. "Yes, to be forgotten. To leave no trace, this was the true horror." Dr. Hassan carefully rewrapped the papyrus. "And so they built monuments in stone, painted their deeds on tomb walls, and trusted Anubis to be fair in his judgment." As he returned the precious scroll to its chest, he added, "The priest writes that some tried to cheat the scales." "How?" "Heart scarabs, amulets placed over the heart during mummification, inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead, magical words to prevent the heart from testifying against its owner. A smile touched his lips. But the priest says Anubis was never fooled. The heart always spoke its truth in the end. That night back in my hotel room, I dreamed again of Anubis. This time I was in the Hall of Two Truths, watching as a procession of people approached the scales. Each one's heart was placed on the balance, and each time the feather dipped or rose accordingly. Some faces showed terror, others peace, and through it all Anubis stood impassive, neither cruel nor kind, simply true. I woke with a question that hadn't occurred to me before. What would my own heart reveal if placed upon those ancient scales? "There is someone you should meet," Dr. Hassan said the next morning over breakfast. We sat in a small cafe near Khan el-Khalili, Cairo's ancient market. Around us, the city was already pulsing with life. Vendors setting up stalls, children running to school, the scent of baking bread mingling with exhaust fumes and spices. "My uncle," he continued, stirring sugar into his tea. "He is a Hakawati, a traditional storyteller. The old stories live in him, in a way they never could in my academic papers." We finished our meal and navigated through narrow streets that twisted like the tributaries of the Nile. The further we went, the quieter the city became until we reached a district that seemed forgotten by time. Here, old men played backgammon in doorways and women hung laundry from wrought iron balconies. The modern world felt distant, a dream half remembered. Dr. Hassan led me to a small cafe tucked between a spice merchant and a coppersmith. Inside, ceiling fans stirred the hot air ineffectually. Old men sat smoking water pipes and playing dominoes. In the corner, a very elderly man held court, his audience a mixture of ages. His voice rose and fell in the cadence of classical Arabic, his hands painting pictures in the air. "Uncle Ahmad," Dr. Hassan greeted him when he finished his tale. The old man's face creased with delight. "Mahmoud, you bring a foreigner to hear the old stories." His English was accented but clear, his eyes sharp despite the cataracts clouding them. "This is the young scholar I mentioned," Dr. Hassan said, though I'd never considered myself a scholar. "The one who sees Anubis in dreams." Uncle Ahmad studied me with sudden intensity. "Ah," he said finally. Sit. You must try the mint tea here, the best in Cairo." As we drank the sweet, fragrant tea, Uncle Ahmad spoke of his childhood in a village near Luxor, where the ancient temples stood as everyday presences rather than tourist attractions. He'd grown up with the old gods as near and real as the saints his family officially worshipped. "Anubis was always my favorite," he confessed with a conspiratorial smile. "So serious, so fair, no tricks like Thoth, no jealousy like Horus, just the scales and the truth." "Tell the story of Nakhti," Dr. Hassan prompted. "The scribe who tried to cheat the scales." Uncle Ahmad's eyes lit up. Setting aside his pipe, he straightened in his chair and began, "In the time of Ramses the Great, there lived a royal scribe named Nakhti. His reed pens recorded the pharaoh's decrees. His papyri held the empire's secrets. To the world, he was a man of letters, of learning, of impeccable character. But Nakhti had a second set of records, hidden accounts where he skimmed grain from the royal storehouses, gold from the temple offerings. For 20 years he stole with one hand while writing laws against theft with the other. As he grew old, Nakhti began to fear what awaited him beyond death. He had seen the tomb paintings. He knew of Anubis and the scales, of Amit with her hungry jaws. So he commissioned a heart scarab of fine green stone and had it inscribed with the most powerful spells from the Book of the Dead, spells to silence his heart when it was questioned, to make it light upon the scales. When death finally came for Nakhti, he journeyed through the perils of Duat, the underworld, confident in his magical protection. The jackals that guarded the gates let him pass. The lake of fire did not burn him. He reached the Hall of Two Truths where Osiris sat in judgment. There stood Anubis by the golden scales, tall and solemn, his jackal ears alert. There waited Thoth with his scribe's palette ready to record. And there lurked Amit, licking her lips with a crocodile's tongue. Nakti approached the scales, the heart scarab heavy around his neck. When Anubis reached for his heart, Nakti felt the scarab grow warm against his chest. But Anubis only smiled, a jackal's smile, all teeth and knowledge. "For your heart speaks even in its silence," he said. Nakti watched in horror as Anubis placed not his physical heart upon the scales, but something else. Something pulled from deep within him. It was red and pulsing and heavy with secrets. "This is your true heart," Anubis said, "the one you cannot hide." The scales dipped dramatically. The feather of Ma'at rose high. And Amit stepped forward, her three-part body, hippopotamus, lion, crocodile, moving with terrible purpose. "Wait," cried Nakti. "I can explain. I can make offerings." But Anubis shook his head. "The time for explanations was in life," he said. "Here there is only what is." And Amit opened her jaws. Uncle Ahmad fell silent. The cafe around us seemed to hold its breath. "What happened then?" I asked, though I already knew. The old storyteller shrugged. "Oblivion. Nakti ceased to be. His name was forgotten until it was found centuries later on a tomb wall, a warning to others who might try to deceive the scales." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the space between us. "Remember, young scholar, we all meet Anubis in the end. And the heart always speaks its truth, whether we wish it to or not." As we left the cafe, the afternoon sun casting our shadows long across the narrow street, I felt the weight of Uncle Ahmad's story settle in my chest. Not a burden, but an awareness I hadn't carried before. "There is a gathering tonight," Dr. Hassan said that evening as we walked along the Nile Corniche. The river flowed dark and ancient beside us, reflecting the lights of the city. Scholars mostly, but also those who keep the old ways alive in their hearts. "Would you like to come?" I hesitated only briefly before nodding. My dreams of Anubis had intensified since visiting the tomb and hearing Uncle Ahmad's tale. Something was unfolding within me, a recognition perhaps, or an awakening. "What kind of gathering?" I asked. "A vigil of sorts, a remembrance." His voice was careful, measuring each word. "Nothing that would upset the religious authorities. We are not reconstructing ancient rites, but we honor the wisdom in them, the truths they still hold." Later that night, a taxi dropped us at a nondescript apartment building in a quiet neighborhood of Giza. The pyramids loomed in the distance, their ancient silhouettes visible even through the city's haze. We climbed 5 flights of stairs to reach a door marked only with a small Ankh symbol painted in gold. Dr. Hassan knocked a precise pattern, and the door opened to reveal a woman about his age, her silver hair pulled back in a severe knot. They exchanged greetings in Arabic, and she led us into a space that seemed impossibly large for a city apartment. The room was dimly lit by oil lamps that cast long, shifting shadows. About a dozen people were present, some seated on cushions, others standing in quiet conversation. They were a diverse group, men and women, young and old, some in Western clothes, others in traditional galabeas. At the center of the room stood a replica of Anubis, smaller than the museum statue, but crafted with evident care. Before it lay a set of brass scales, a white feather resting on one side. "Welcome," said our hostess, speaking English for my benefit. I am Dr. Fatima Khalil. Like Mahmoud, I study the ancient ways, though my field is anthropology rather than archaeology. We are pleased to have you join us. The gathering began formally with the lighting of incense. Someone produced a small drum and began a slow, heartbeat rhythm. Dr. Khalil read passages from the Book of the Dead, not in hieroglyphics but in Arabic, with Dr. Hassan quietly translating into English for me. O my heart which I had from my mother, O my heart of my different ages, do not stand up as a witness against me. Do not be opposed to me in the tribunal. Do not be hostile to me in the presence of the keeper of the balance. The words flowed over me, ancient and yet immediate. This wasn't a religious service as I understood it, but a scholarly recreation, an experiential study. And yet, as the drum continued its steady pulse and the incense smoke curled through the air, the boundary between academic exercise and spiritual practice began to blur. Dr. Khalil distributed papyrus and reed pens. We will now contemplate the 42 negative confessions, she explained. These were declarations of innocence the deceased would make before Osiris. I have not committed sin. I have not stolen. I have not slain people. She instructed us to reflect on these ancient ethical statements and to write our own thoughts, not for sharing, but as a personal meditation on truth and conscience. As I wrote, the room around me seemed to shift. The walls receded, the ceiling rose. The small flame of the oil lamp beside me stretched and transformed, becoming a blazing torch in a vast hall. The steady drumbeat became the pulse of my own heart, loud in my ears. And there across the space stood Anubis. Not the statue, but the god himself, tall and imposing, jackal-headed, eyes reflecting the torchlight. The scales before him gleamed gold. I knew I was experiencing some kind of waking dream, a vivid hallucination brought on by suggestion, atmosphere, and my own fascination. And yet it felt utterly real, more real perhaps than the world I had always known. Anubis looked directly at me, his gaze neither kind nor cruel, simply aware. He gestured to the scales. Would you be measured? His voice seemed to ask, though no sound disturbed the air. I felt a sudden terror. What would my heart reveal? The petty cruelties, the small dishonesties, the failures of courage and kindness that marked my life. Would they weigh heavier than truth? In that moment, I understood what the ancient Egyptians had known, that we are ultimately accountable not to some external judge, but to ourselves. The scales merely reveal what we already know in our deepest core. Yes, I whispered, though I'm not sure if I spoke aloud or only in my mind. I would be measured. Anubis inclined his head, and I felt something pull free from within me, not physically painful, but a sensation of profound vulnerability. My heart laid bare. As it settled on the scale, I closed my eyes, unable to watch. The silence stretched, broken only by the drum's heartbeat rhythm. Look, came the voiceless command. I opened my eyes to see the scales in perfect balance, my heart level with the feather of Ma'at. Not because I was without fault, but because I was willing to acknowledge my truths, to stand before them without evasion. The vision faded gradually, the grand hall dissolving back into Dr. Khalil's apartment, the torches becoming oil lamps once more. I blinked, disoriented, to find the gathering continuing around me. How long had I been lost in my waking dream? Seconds? Minutes? Dr. Hassan caught my eye from across the room and nodded slightly, as if he understood exactly what had happened. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he had experienced something similar himself, in his decades of studying the ancient ways. As the evening concluded with mint tea and quiet conversation, I felt changed, not dramatically but subtly, as if something that had been tightly wound within me had loosened. The weight I carried felt different now, acknowledged rather than hidden. Later, walking back to my hotel through Cairo's midnight streets, the words of the negative confessions echoed in my mind. I have not committed sin. I have not stolen. I have not spoken lies. Simple ethical principles that had guided an ancient civilization, and now, thousands of years later, still held the power to make one look inward with clear eyes. The scales of Anubis had found their balance in me, at least for tonight. Dawn found me walking alone along the Nile, watching as the first light turned the river from black to silver. Sleep had been elusive after the night's experiences, my mind too full of ancient words and modern questions. So I had slipped out as the city began to stir. Drawn to the timeless flow of the water that had witnessed the rise and fall of the civilization, I was coming to understand. The air was surprisingly cool, carrying the scent of mud and growing things beneath the ever-present urban smells of Cairo. A few fishermen were already out in their small boats, their silhouettes dark against the lightening sky. Birds I couldn't name called to one another across the water. I found a quiet spot away from the early morning vendors and sat on a low stone wall, watching the light strengthen. The concept of Ma'at had been present throughout my conversations with Dr. Hassan. Truth, justice, harmony, the right order of things. The Egyptians had believed that Ma'at was not just a goddess, but a fundamental principle that governed the universe. The feather in the scales represented this cosmic balance. To have a heart as light as the feather meant to have lived in accordance with Ma'at, to have been honest, just kind in balance with the world. As the sun finally broke above the horizon, painting the water with gold, I found myself considering the burdens I carried in my own heart. Not the dramatic sins of Uncle Ahmad's scribe. I had never stolen or murdered, but the smaller failures that accumulate over a lifetime, moments of cowardice masked as practicality, truths left unspoken, kindnesses withheld, the previous night's vision, dream, hallucination, whatever it had been, had shown my heart in balance with the feather. But I knew that balance wasn't a permanent state. It required constant attention, constant choice. A memory surfaced, my father in his hospital bed 2 years earlier, asking if I forgave him for his absences during my childhood. I had said yes, the expected response, but in my heart, I had still held on to the hurt, the accumulated resentment of missed school plays and lonely holidays. He had died believing we were reconciled, while I carried the weight of my untruth. Another memory, a friend whose writing I had privately dismissed while praising it to her face, afraid to hurt her feelings, but also afraid to have the difficult conversation that true friendship sometimes demands. Small moments, small untruths, small failures of courage, but they added weight to the heart nevertheless. I picked up a smooth stone from beside the wall and held it in my palm, feeling its heft. Then I stood and walked to the water's edge. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said aloud. Though there was no one to hear but the river and the rising sun, I was still angry. I should have told you the truth, that I needed time. That forgiveness is a process, not a single act. I should have given us both the chance for real reconciliation. I tossed the stone into the Nile, watching the ripples spread outward. I found another stone. I should have been honest with Lena about her writing. A true friend would have been kind but truthful. That stone too joined the waters of the ancient river, one by one. I acknowledged the small failings that weighed upon me, not to wallow in guilt but to see clearly, to restore balance. With each stone cast into the water, I felt a subtle lightening, a shift toward Ma'at within myself. When I had no more stones to cast, I stood watching the river flow onward, as it had for millennia, carrying my small confessions toward the sea. The air felt clearer somehow, the light more direct. I took a deep breath, then another, feeling the rhythm of my heart. A movement caught my eye. A heron landing gracefully at the water's edge, its reflection perfect in the still shallows. It stood motionless, patient, attentive, and for just a moment, its silhouette against the rising sun reminded me of another figure, tall, watchful, with pointed ears. I smiled at my mind's tendency to find connections, to create meaning. Whether Anubis was a cultural memory, a psychological archetype, or something more numinous, his lesson had reached across thousands of years to touch me here. Now the heron thrust its beak into the water with sudden precision and rose with a fish struggling in its grip. Life and death, the eternal cycle, playing out before me as it had along this river since time immemorial. By the time I returned to my hotel, the day was fully established, Cairo alive with sound and movement. I called Dr. Hassan and asked if we could meet. There was more I wanted to learn, more I needed to understand about the ancient wisdom that had begun to transform my modern heart. We met at the same small cafe where we had first had tea. He looked at me with curious eyes, noting something different in my demeanor. "You seem lighter today," he said, stirring sugar into his glass. I nodded, surprised by his perception, but also understanding it. "I visited the river this morning. I did my own weighing of the heart." His smile was gentle, knowing. "And what did you find?" "That the truth does set you free, even when it's your own truth acknowledged only to yourself." I sipped my tea, finding the sweetness more balanced than before. I think I understand now why the Egyptians feared the devouring of the heart more than any physical punishment. To lose one's heart is to lose oneself, one's identity, one's capacity for truth. "Yes," he said. "They understood that we are our choices, our actions, our truths. Without these, we are nothing." "Will you tell me more about Ma'at?" I asked. "About how they maintain this balance in daily life, not just in preparation for death." He nodded, his eyes brightening at my genuine interest. As he began to speak of ancient